Hello and welcome to the Biz Talk podcast, where I have the honor of speaking to some of the world's best entrepreneurs who are doing work that matters and changing the world one person at a time. My name is Charlene, and let's dive in. Mr. Jason, I have the best news ever. Are you ready for it?
Yes.
Mr. Jack Black has come back to us on a conversation that we had about mandatory minimum wage. You remember the first time that he came back to us?
Yes, I do. He had a lengthy response, and I had an even lengthier response to his response.
Well, this is exciting because the two of you now have an ongoing dialogue. And today, when I saw his further response to your lengthy response to his original lengthy response, I got super excited. And I know that I don't know Mr. Jack Black or whatever his real name is, but man, I cannot thank him enough for taking the time to be able to actually have an intellectual dialogue. Isn't that freaking amazing?
Yes, I love that. And their name, Jack Black, they must have pretty good taste. So,
right? Well, that was the first thing I saw. I'm like, oh, well, I already like him. Like, that's just great. I mean, how can you not love that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Which brings us to why we are having this discussion today. The first response I will not review. You guys have already had an interaction. So we're going to summarize that. And we're going to today, I'm going to read out loud Mr. Jack Black's response. I know I can do this because he made it public on YouTube. And I'm going to break it up. And you and I are going to have a discussion about each and every single point he made. Because there are points here that I see where he's coming from. There are points that I disagree with him on. And then there are points where I think he presents a good argument. And I would like to see where you land on some of these things. What do you think?
Love that.
All right, so let's dive in. So Mr. Jack Black, this one's for you, my new friend. All right, so here's how he starts. He says, the reason why I got upset about the focus on businesses was not because of the focus on businesses. It makes perfect sense that you would focus on businesses. Now in this, Jason, he's right. You're a business person. I'm a business person. This discussion was about mandatory minimum wage and the impact on business, correct?
Yes, correct. Yeah, that's the first discussion that Jack Black referenced in his first response. Yes.
Okay. He says, I got upset because of the lack of acknowledgement of daily realities of people who work at these businesses. As someone who does not know anything about you, it struck me as quite callous. Policies need to be considered within their broader social context. What are your thoughts there so far?
So that's another reason we wanted to do this, frankly. Charlene's great idea to do this is because anyone who knows me, when I saw the word callous, I laughed because anyone who knows me know that is the extreme opposite of me and my personality and how I treat people. So that is one reason we wanted to do this. In terms of the actual response, I actually agree with his response. We did not get into the social impacts at all in the previous discussion, frankly, because we were talking from a business owner's perspective, and how it affects businesses and the $15 minimum wage and how that will, frankly, it's not a maybe, it's a will lead to lost jobs. And we were talking about that from the business perspective and why that's going to happen due to low margins and stuff like that. The reason, when it comes to the social stuff, I don't talk about social stuff on public platforms, frankly, because I don't think most people care about my opinions on social stuff. When it comes to that, that's the same reason I don't talk political issues, is because, frankly, I don't think most people care about my political issues. So that's why I didn't address, those are the reasons why we didn't address the social impact in the first interview and my first response to Jack Black.
Very fair. And to add to that, I will confess that my initial reaction when I saw callous, I was also to laugh out loud, because as you mentioned, if anyone were to get to know you, there's no way they would come away with that impression. That is just straight up not who you are. However, he made an interesting point. He said, if I didn't know, he didn't know anything about you. So we're saying, well, if you knew me, you wouldn't be that callous. But he's saying, no, I don't know you. So it came across as callous. I think he's got a valid point there. What do you
I
think?
think so too. I think so too.
Yeah.
And that's something maybe we will address today in terms of
Yeah.
this entire audio. And maybe that's definitely something I need to think about kind of going forward as well. But I mean, typically, if I get socially involved or politically involved, that would probably have a negative impact on my business. In all likelihood, frankly, it doesn't matter which side of the aisle I'm on; I would get heat from either side.
You're going to
Uh,
piss someone off.
yeah, which I don't mind doing, but when it's not furthering the point of helping people gain financial literacy and learn value investing to better their lives and to stay out and get out of poverty, which is our goal with all of our content, I don't necessarily know that furthers those goals either.
I think that's very fair. And that right there is one of the reasons that attracted you and I to work together, because we share that common goal. We do both realize that sometimes if we go down this road, we could piss some people off, but it's got to be for a good reason and hopefully for the greater good. But
Yeah.
I don't think either one of us just want to have a conversation about politics and policies just to have one, right?
No, correct. Because that'll just end up in either a screaming match or the other person screaming at us, and then usually when that kind of happens, I usually just kind of sit back and smile, and
yeah,
then they get even more mad, and that doesn't usually end well in my experience talking about social and political issues in my personal life. So
yeah, which makes sense. I mean, let's look at it logically. Neither one of us have a business that's oriented to politics and political discussion, so neither one of us would have gone there.
Yeah, no, exactly, and hopefully that makes sense, Jack Black, with that context.
Yeah. All right. Well, he has further examples here, so let's dive into this a little further. He says policies need to be considered within their broader social context. For example, let's say I was talking about the economics of cobalt mining regulations in the DRC without addressing the child/slave labor issues. These are twin paired problems. For me to condemn only the economics of regulations without condemning the child slave labor is, to some extent, an endorsement of said labor by omission. Now, what are your thoughts there? Because I certainly have a few of my own.
And I'm assuming Jack Black means Democratic Republic of Congo there, for DRC is short. Frankly, I don't have any knowledge of child slave labor there, so I don't have an opinion on that. If they are doing that, obviously that's horrific. Here is where I disagree with Jack Black, or one of the points I'm probably going to disagree with Jack Black on. Just because I don't say I disagree with something vehemently doesn't mean I endorse it. I'm not an emotional person. I'm a very logically driven person, and I don't get emotional about really anything unless it's like my family. So when it comes to the emotional side of things, and again, the hypothetical at this point, because I don't know if that's happening in the Democratic Republic of Congo, that's saying that I think we should put the U.S. back into what it was in like the 1850s. I don't agree with that, and I don't think I need to say that to make the point that while I don't necessarily agree with minimum wage, I don't want to go back to the 1850s in the United States either. I just think that's kind of a not a silly point, but to me it's just so obvious that it doesn't even need stating to me when I talk about this kind of stuff, because I've never once said this anywhere and in my videos, because I don't think it's true. I don't think we should go back to the 1850s. I don't think we should have zero safety nets, social safety nets. That's not what the discussion was about, which is why we didn't cover that stuff in that video.
Very fair. And I will share my point of view on this, and then I will come back and I will wonder out loud what his point actually was. And then if I'm incorrect, we know Jack Black enough by now to know he's going to come back and correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
So my point of view, you took a very logical stance. Now, I don't know anything about DRC or any situation he's talking about. Cannot speak intelligently to that. But the issue I took was the same issue you took when he said to not say it indicates that we agree. No, that's not fair. That, to me, what I heard there is silence is compliance. And no, I have a very visceral reaction to that. When it comes to conducting business, talking about hiring, firing, policies, minimum wage, etc. Just because I do not specifically draw out in depth a counter argument does not mean that I also agree with that argument. In my case, it could mean I am speaking in the area that I have the expertise in. I'm not going to go down the road of speaking in an area that I don't. So I do not appreciate anyone trying to tell me because you didn't bring this up, it must mean you agree with it. That to me is a social argument, and I reject that premise.
And actually, I agree with that. And that's another reason that I only talk about things that I'm an expert at. And one of the things I'm an expert at is investing, business, finance, that realm. I'm not an expert. I don't pretend. I'm not one of these social media people who pretends they're an expert on every single topic that comes up. If I literally don't know something, I'll say I don't know. Or if I don't have an opinion, I say I don't know, and then I'll learn about it if it's interesting to me or I think I need to learn about it. And it drives my wife and my kids crazy, frankly, when I say I don't know, because I'm reading and learning all the time. And even my daughter, my oldest daughter, who is 10, getting ready to turn 11 in November, she's like, Daddy, but you're the boss and you read all the time and you're super smart. You don't know everything? No, I don't. No, I don't. And if I don't know something, I'm going to say I don't know. That's just who I am. And again, I don't pretend to be an expert on stuff that I'm not an expert on. If it comes to, like, if you want to use Nike as an example, because they have been, I don't know if it's been proven, but there have been allegations of using child labor in places over the world for years. If they are, again, I don't know. And there's those words again, I don't know for sure, because I never dug super deep into this. But if you think that they are, then the solution to me would be to not use their products. If you don't want to support that. And again, I wouldn't support that. I don't support that. But yeah, that goes back to my earlier points too of I agree that I'm not going to frankly say in any, especially I think that first video clip was in a longer interview, and that first video clip I think was like 6.5 minutes long. There's no way we can cover counterpoint and all that and all the potential hypotheticals in even 2 hours. That would take an entire day to do that. And frankly, that's, unless if somebody wants to ask me my opinion on stuff, I'm an open book. I'll answer those questions, but I'm not going to try to cover every single point and counterpoint in a 2-hour long video, because frankly, I don't think it's useful in that conversation. And I don't want to spend my time doing that, frankly.
Fair. Yeah, because we want to tie it back to financial literacy. That's the point of our conversations, and empowering people to know intellectually what to do with their money should they choose to do so. Yes,
exactly.
All right. Now, I said that I would present my response as well, and then I would surmise what I think he's getting at, because he's getting here next. I'm thinking that what Jack is pointing out is, okay, well, maybe you don't know out of the counterpoints, but you might have a social responsibility to at least be aware enough to bring them up. And here's why I think he's doing this. He says, this is because I ignore the central problem and human context, reject a perceived solution to said human problem, and justify the current state of things with an economic argument. It would have been fine if I had provided the context of child labor or an alternative solution, if you are condemning a perceived solution in the same way. To talk about minimum wage, an argument that is about making life affordable for a significant segment of the American population without providing a viable alternative, without addressing the viability of the minimum wage as a solution to poverty, and without even addressing the central problem, which is an endorsement by omission. There's a lot here, so we're going to stop here. So I'm going to back up and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions based on some of the things he has said here. Perfect. He is pointing out exactly what I said. He is pointing out that since you didn't, and neither did I, point out the fact that mandatory minimum wage could be a proposed solution, and here's why. I think he is saying that we dropped the ball. That if we're going to talk about mandatory minimum wage, even in the focus of business, then we may have had a further obligation to point out why some Americans affected by it would want the mandatory minimum wage. What do you think?
I love this question, and that point that Jack Black made. I love it but I disagree with it. Frankly, because I don't believe that the $15 minimum wage will do anything to solve poverty. Why? Because of the reasons we talked about in that video and part 2 of that video, where businesses are going to fail, or because of $15 minimum wage, or they will replace people with AI automations and robots, which was the entire discussion, is why we were talking about $15 minimum wage. Again, this is going to happen because it's already happening. In part 2 of that video that I referenced in my first response to Jack Black to watch, this is already happening. Where I live in the Tampa Bay, Florida area, they don't have as many employees at Wendy's, for example. They have automated, they don't have a cashier. They just have somebody up there kind of if you need help or something was wrong, and you put your own order in. And that means fewer employees. McDonald's is developing robots to flip burgers. Amazon is actually adding jobs. So those are 2 examples of companies that are where places are losing jobs to AI automations and robots. And again, this has already happened in my local area. Amazon, however, is using robots, AI, and automation to hire even more people. So the entire conversation we were having, I could see his point out without that context of the entire conversation, but with the entire conversation, frankly, I just don't think the $15 minimum wage will do anything to alleviate poverty for the other things like inflation that we talked about in the video, and loss of jobs and low business margins and all that stuff. I just don't think it will.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, here's where I'm coming from on that. I liked that he made this point. I also do want to say that our original discussion was not, the point was not to present mandatory minimum wage as a solution. We both rejected that as a solution on the premise of that discussion right from the get-go. So since we are rejecting that premise, why would we want to go through and argue for that premise? It would make, as you said, for a very long, superfluous video. It wouldn't stay focused. So I'll add to that.
Correct.
The other thing is to add to what you just said. It's already happening. Businesses will respond accordingly. If somebody presents an argument that mandatory minimum wage is the way to go and it is a solution, and somebody buys into that, well, we're already seeing it playing out. Now, I live in a very rural part of central New York. I am a country person. I have been the type of person to raise my own meats and my chickens. I grow what I eat. Even in the small area that I am in, mom and pops not only can go out of business anytime mandatory, even anytime New York State raises the minimum wage. They're not even talking about mandatories now. They just raise it. Businesses go under. Their margins are too tight. And so if I was going to talk to somebody who agreed with mandatory minimum wage, I would say this to them. Okay, I understand where you're coming from on the social solution side, but social solutions are in a vacuum if we just look at them. Ideologically, or ideally, do we all need money? No, we can probably just share our resources and all get along and live in utopia, but that is not the way the world works. So we cannot make a social argument over whether or not mandatory minimum wage is a useful solution if we don't also look at the realistic way businesses are run. So if this person wants to say we should have mandatory minimum wage, okay, fine, and we apply it in my area, well, now half the businesses are out. There's no more jobs. Did that really provide a solution to begin with? That's what I would say. What do you think?
Yeah, and I agree with that because we talked about that. I think it was in part 2 of this video that we talked about this, and that margins, again, Apple, I used Apple in the video as an extreme outlier. They make like $60 billion in free cash flow per year. They can do whatever they want.
Mm-hmm.
That's the extreme outlier. Them, Amazon, Berkshire Hathaway, there's probably maybe 12 to 25 companies in the entire world that are like that. But again, after analyzing thousands or tens of thousands of companies worldwide, both public companies and private companies, far fewer than 95% of all companies on earth earn consistently higher margins than 5%. Higher profit margins than 5%. When that happens, again, as we talked about in the video, if and when a $15 minimum wage comes up, either the business is going to go out of business potentially because the margins are so low, because between 40 and 70% of all business expenses for pretty much businesses kind of just generally across the board are in employee expenses. So they're going to cut people, they're going to have people work fewer hours, or they're going to get replaced with robots, AI, and automation. Again, like I said, and I covered this all in the video. So for those listening who watched the video, I apologize for that, but just give some context here to Jack Black. I know he watched the first video. I don't know if he watched the second video.
No, it's good. Yeah, keep providing the context. We're good.
Yeah, we covered all this and why. Again, this has already happened. This is not a 5, 10, 20 years down the road thing. This has already happened. Now, to the social issues. Again, that's why we did get into the social issues earlier, because frankly, when people just bring up social issues, yes, they're important. The human experience is the most important thing in the entire world, in my opinion. And that's coming from a numbers logic finance nerd. The people experience is the most important experience, but it's not the only experience. When people raise social issues of any kind, they only focus on one side or the other, and then they argue with each other. What I do in any kind of thinking I do is I try to think about it from both sides and try to figure out what makes sense to me. And I don't just think about the kind of top level layer. I think about the third, fourth, fifth order effects of what will happen if this happens. And that's kind of the thought process I use with all this. Hopefully that makes sense. I do have a couple points on universal basic income, which I'm assuming that Jack Black will bring up at some, even though he hasn't yet in his comments.
Oh, let's go down that road in a little bit here. Let's make a note of that. So he says, I think most people who watch this video will come away with the impression that you believe the status quo to be the best solution because you don't provide anything beside that. Yeah, that is why we didn't preside, in my point of view, that is why I didn't even ask questions to present another solution, because he is correct. I believe the status quo is the best solution given what we have to work with at this time. What are your thoughts?
I agree. And that's, I mean, what I read out of that comment is capitalism versus an XYZ named economic system. If that is the question, if that's how I'm reading it, then yes, you are correct. I am a capitalist. I believe in capitalism. Is it perfect? No. Is it working well right now? No, but that's frankly, in my opinion, due to, in large part, governments and Federal Reserves worldwide, which we talked about in another video, and why I actually have a couple of videos named how the U.S. Federal Reserve is creating inflation and economic disparities. We talk about those in those Facebook Lives we did as well. There's a saying, and I don't remember who said this, but I think I might have heard it from Warren Buffett, is capitalism perfect? No. Is it the best thing we know how to do? Yes, at this point in history, it is. We've tried the other stuff. It hasn't worked. So at this point in history, if you have another better option that we have not tried, I'm open to hear it. I don't know if most other people, especially in the finance realm, where I'm open to hear it.
Love that. He says, I understand that you are a business guy, and I think you should be talking about the economics of the minimum wage, and you should be doing this from a business perspective. But you have to address the massive problem that the minimum wage is meant to solve. And this is why, despite not saying anything like my hyperbolic, this is why you need to die, we'll address in a minute, you implicitly endorsed a system that happens. Now, I will add to you, no, we didn't implicitly endorse it. We actually straight up endorsed it for reasons we just covered. Now, what is your response to, I understand you're a business guy and you should be talking about it, but you have to address the massive problem that minimum wage is meant to solve. What's this massive problem we have to solve, Jason?
Income inequality is usually the argument for that. And again, I agree. That is an enormous problem the United States and frankly worldwide needs to figure out how to fix. But again, we covered this in the Federal Reserve inflation economic disparity videos that you can see. The government's largely causing that, specifically the Federal Reserve, in my opinion. How are they doing that? We covered those in the videos. And I think those videos combined are like 30 minutes long. So I think there's two different ones and they might be 20 to 30 minutes long. So I'm not going to cover all of that here. But in my opinion, again, specifically the Federal Reserve, are the ones causing this with things like low interest rates, which create debt bubbles, which create market bubbles, which create all the other things we talked about in the video. How? Because in a basic level, again, watch the videos for full context, but how does that happen? Because when those things happen, low interest rates, negative interest rates in some countries, all that stuff, it means the people that have money already get more money because they can use the money they already have to multiply it faster, while people that save or are just getting by are losing out due to effects like inflation, which we're dealing with right now. And automatically with inflation at 5.4%, if you're not improving your income at 5.4%, you're losing 5.4% every year. And that's how rich become richer in these kind of situations, because they have the ability to multiply their money and invest at higher rates of return than people in middle class or poor that don't have those assets.
Fair enough. Now, this comment, we have to address this. He says, and this is why, despite not saying anything like my hyperbolic, this is why you need to die. You implicitly endorse the system where that happens. Now, let's take a deviation here. That comment was a part of his first response to you. And he was trying to illustrate that by not saying this stuff, you basically were like, well, then you just need to die. Now, we both know that you did not say that. You would never say that. He's acknowledging it. He's saying, no, I know you would never say that, but that's basically the impression that you gave. All right. Now, he says, now, do I think you actually endorse that? Probably not, but you appear to, and that is the key. Now, he is saying that you appear to be saying to people, well, if you can't work harder, then you need to die. Or if you don't like the system, you need to die. You appear to. Do you agree that you appear to? And what are your thoughts on that?
I disagree. I never said anything even close to that in the video. I've never once said anything like that in personal conversations with anybody, because frankly, I don't believe that's true. Again, I'm kind of laughing right now as I'm saying it, because to me, again, anyone that knows me knows that's silly. But again, he didn't know me before these videos. But again, I never said anything like that. So this is where, again, I go back to logic pretty much always. This is why, one reason why I don't get into these social and political issues is because I can stay and remain calm while having these discussions. And frankly, I like having these discussions. I just don't have them because the other side usually, almost probably 99% of the time, are the ones that get emotional and angry and start hurling insults and stuff like that. And that's when I just kind of smile and kind of, okay, whatever. But that's another reason I don't get into social issues, because I don't get emotional about, again, unless it involves my family or something that I can control, I don't get involved in it. Or I don't get emotional about it. And typically I don't get involved in it either.
Yeah. All right. He carries on. And after I read this, Jack, I have a respectful challenge for you from me, not from Jason. He says, there are people who are okay with not having livable wages. A lot of them are finance and business guys. And you, who are an excellent investor and a role model, I do agree with both those things, you are, appear to confirm this belief. Mr. Jack, my name is Charlene Eaton. My challenge to you is point out those people. I want to know what their arguments are. I have never seen a finance or business guy or woman come and say, I am okay with people not having livable wages. Now, what I see is them presenting arguments for or against mandatory minimum wage, but I don't tend to see these people taking social issues. And I feel like in this case, you are trying to tie it to a social issue. So would you please be able to present who are those people and what have they said? I'll be very happy to go and look at their arguments, and then we can carry on with that point. That's my challenge to you, Jack. But Jason, you have your own opinions and your own mind on things. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, and frankly, again, I've been in finance and investment. Sorry, my the wind's picking up, so hopefully the wind
sounds great.
isn't too loud. I've been in the finance and investment realm for 15 plus years now. I've never once heard anybody say poor people are evil, poor people are the devil. I've just never heard that. I've never heard that it's okay to have economic disparities. I've never heard that it's okay to have economic inequality. I've never heard that. in any books, resources, articles, podcasts, videos, courses, anything I've ever taken. I've never heard that either. So I'd be interested if you do have those sources, Jack. Yeah, I would love to see those sources as well. Again, if it's a crazy, legit, like crazy person online, I mean, I'm not going to give it too much credence. I'll be fully honest with you. But I've just never seen it. I'm trying to think of an example. I've never once seen it. Again, every example I've seen has been against either universal basic income or raising the minimum wage. It's always been on economic grounds, on not making sense. It's never been that argument. So yeah, I don't know how to respond to that either, frankly.
All right, very fair. And let's define crazy. How I would define that is, we don't, if anyone were to present us somebody who says something like this, that I do not think that there should be livable wages, I disagree with that. Well, if that person is extremely into bug out bags and we're going to overthrow the American government and we can't trust anyone, well, I would call that person a radical and I would disregard everything they said. What I'm talking about here, and I think what you're talking about, Jason, is an actual bona fide person that is in the finance field conducting business as a financial investor. That person I'd be more interested in. If it's just a lunatic that doesn't even make money or help anybody doing this stuff, then no, they have to be qualified to give the opinion. That'd be the qualifications there.
Yeah. I mean, if it's just some rando on the internet talking about, burning the US government down or doing something crazy like that, I'm going to completely disregard pretty much everything they say, even if they are making rational points.
Yeah, because then we got to question the source. All right, he carries on. He says, on YouTube, unlike a physical one-on-one discussion, what you appear to say, or even what you appear to implicitly say, matters more than what you actually say or actually think, because you will not have a chance to correct them. I cannot tell you how much I disagree with that premise.
I do too. Can I go first?
Yes, please. Please do.
Okay, so this is the one thing I vehemently disagree with. I can kind of see the other points and counterpoints and arguments. This one I completely disagree with, and frankly, it's pretty rare that I vehemently disagree with anything, because I'm a very agreeable guy and I'm open to other viewpoints. Mm-hmm. The reason I'm so vehemently against this is what I can do is control what I say, control what I do, control the people I help, control the people me and my team help. I can control those things. I can't control how people perceive me or see the subtext, which I'm not a subtext guy at all. I say what I mean, and I mean what I say. That there's that old saying. I don't do the subtext things. I don't do mind games. I don't do anything like that. So I can't control those things, especially when it comes to theory or appearance or hypotheticals. Again, there are an infinite number of those, and frankly, I'm not going to go over all of the potential hypotheticals or things we might be missing or not talking about, because I think my time is better served trying to help people than trying to worry about what other people are saying, frankly.
Yeah. Jason, you said it well. The only thing that I will summarize with it, because that's why I disagree with it as well. I will summarize with this. If anyone, you included, Jason, are going to form an opinion on me, then I would ask that you form that opinion based on the words that I say and the actions that I take. If you don't know what my stance is on something because I didn't specifically address it, then I would encourage you to ask, and I'll be happy to have that discussion. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, and I'm the same way. I'm an open book, as you know. And if you have any questions, let me know. But yeah, I just don't do the subtext things. I don't do hypotheticals. I don't do theory. I do what I do and say what I believe in. And there's no subtext. There's no hidden meanings. There's no implicit meanings. There's no any of that. It's just who I am.
Fair. All right.
Oh, sorry. And there's one more point.
Yeah.
I have some almost 1,000 videos on YouTube. I have a blog for 10 years. I publish my financial results publicly. So if you can literally find out just about anything you want to find out about me, if you can't find out about it, ask.
Quite qualified point there. I love that.
Thank you.
All right. He says, People are going to watch this video, take it as confirmation bias for their morally abhorrent positions, and feel confident in this because you are a figure of immense authority conferred by return and quality content. Okay, so before I ask you this question, let me pull this apart a little bit. First issue that I'm taking here, because we're having an intellectual discussion, but he throws in an opinion. His opinion is morally abhorrent positions. Well, the problem I have with that is the point of these discussions is for us to remain focused on business, finances, and financial literacy. He threw in an opinion, which the basis of his argument seems to indicate that you have some kind of social responsibility to change people's personal opinions about how they wish to conduct their lives. I disagree with that. That is not what your responsibility is, and that is not even what you're setting out to do. What are your thoughts?
I 100% agree with that. I frankly thank you for thinking I'm someone of immense authority. However, I think you're vastly overestimating me on that. But again, I appreciate that truly. This is another point I vehemently disagree with. Is I don't feel, and I don't frankly think, again, like I said earlier, I don't think people care in general about other people's opinions on social, political, frankly, even economic issues, unless they agree with their point, or unless they vehemently disagree with the point, which both sides of the argument trigger the emotions, trigger confirmation bias that Jack Black referenced, trigger all that stuff. I don't care about that stuff, frankly. I care about, again, what I can control. I don't care about influencing other people, although I want to help as many people as I can, and that does require some degree of influence. But that's why I put out so much content and also publish my results publicly, which most financial investors do not do, is so people can actually see the results and see me for who I am. Again, over almost 1,000 videos now. I don't want to be LeBron James and pushing what I believe is true in terms of social and political issues on other people. I just don't. That's not me. Again, you are free to feel however you want to feel. And even if we disagree, you have just as much right to that as I do.
100% on that. Absolutely.
So I just, that's another thing I vehemently disagree with. I don't get into social stuff and political stuff, but those are the more reasons why I don't.
Yeah, and let me underscore that further. Yeah, Jack does have the right to voice what he has already voiced here, and I'm glad that he has done so. That is something that is a shared value between you and I. The point of your content is not to change somebody's social or political beliefs or values or morals. If you want influence, then it is to influence them, to be encouraged to find out and learn how to improve their financial literacy, and their morals, values, politics, any of that really has nothing to do with it. That's why you stay focused on just the money. Is that right?
Morals, I would say, is part of that too, especially in the finance arena. That's a big one. But yeah, otherwise, I would completely agree with everything there. And especially, and I forgot about the morally abhorrent comments. I want to address that again, even though we addressed it earlier. Mm-hmm. Just because I don't say that somebody being a pedophile is bad doesn't mean I endorse pedophilia. Again, there's pedophilia, there's murder, there's rape, there's all sorts of stuff, child labor that he referenced earlier, that is morally abhorrent that I've never once talked about. And just because I don't say I disagree with that vehemently, again, nobody's really ever even asked my opinion on it. I don't think anybody cares. Another thing that came up is that I haven't really talked about before is the police brutality stuff with George Floyd that was going on this time last year.
Yep.
I don't like the police militarization. I don't like the police brutality stuff. Any of that. I think all of that militarization of the police has gone on since 9/11. I think that's gross, frankly. I think that entire situation was disgusting. The knee on his neck, that was horrific. I couldn't even watch the video. But again, I've never talked about that before because frankly, it's never come up, and I didn't feel like I had the need to do so because again, in my opinion, that stuff is all morally disgusting, and somebody shouldn't have to say they're against something. That should be just frankly common sense to me.
Of that. And I will add that that's also not the point of your business or the focus of your content to begin with. So, at some point, I love what you said earlier. If you try to focus on all this stuff, then at some point it's gonna be like, so what is the point of this YouTube channel? Because he's all over the place. We got to stay focused,
Yeah.
Right.
And I already have a hard enough problem with that, as Charlene knows, and my team knows. I already have a hard enough problem with focus.
This is true. Now, this next point that he made, I have to tell you that he garnered my respect on this. This is a sign of maturity and intellectual intelligence, and it's rare to see that. I'd love to see more of this. He says, I'll admit, I did not communicate what I actually thought very well. Now, just that line, I thought, wow, it doesn't even matter what he communicated. The fact that somebody can actually say that is telling me that this person has the emotional IQ and maturity to be able to self-reflect. I admire that. So I wanted to call that out.
Yeah, as do I. Because most people, especially with social media and all that, they're not willing to admit when they're wrong. I thought that was fantastic.
Yeah, I love it. And let's be clear here. He did not admit he was wrong. That's not what he's
correct.
saying. He just said that he may not have communicated it well.
Yes. Or maybe they didn't. Yeah, maybe they didn't do something well enough, all that kind of stuff.
Love it. All right. He says, but the format of the discussion allows me to make amends in a way that video does not. Apologies for the unnecessary personal attacks, but I hope you can see where I was getting at with them. And then he says, too long didn't read, which I thought was very cute because this guy has nerd roots. I can relate to that. I love that.
TLDR, I saw that and started smiling too.
I'm like, oh, Jack, we got to be friends. I don't see that very often, Jason. It sounds like you don't either anymore.
No. And I don't share this. This is another thing I don't share. I'm a super nerd. I read all the time. I'm learning. I play video games still. I love science. I love Star Wars, Marvel movies. So that's something we don't talk about either. But I'm a super nerd as well. So I appreciated that, Jack Black.
And Jason, just from me to you, you wouldn't have to admit you're a nerd. You're a finance guy wearing glasses with no hair. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's why I was attracted to your content to begin with. Yeah, right? You just got to own it.
True. The finance nerd, maybe that's what I should have called my website. The finance nerd, maybe that's what I should have called the website.
There you go. Wait, hey, maybe we can do a lead magnet on that.
Jack Black, don't take that URL.
Yeah, there you go. He might now. Oh, Jack, make him compete. He loves to compete. All right. He says, so he summarizes a little. So let's go through this. He says, not including context when analyzing policy through a business lens, ignores the real problem, leads to implicit endorsement, and due to your authority, creates positive communication bias for clearly big problems. Nothing wrong with using a business lens inherently. I watched through the second video and I have some questions. So I'm going to stop there. I think he did a beautiful job summarizing the discussions that we just went through, but is there anything you'd like to add based on what he summarized there?
Yes, I love that comment too. I do want to add one thing about the policy, because that usually the implication is, I'm not going to say this is what you're meaning, but again, usually the implication is that policies set by the government need to enforce these things. And I do agree with that to a degree. However, I don't count on any policy from any government changing my life drastically, either for the negative or the positive. Because again, I'm a huge believer in controlling what I can control. I cannot control what the I'm not going to say that, what the semi-competent people in Washington and governments worldwide are doing. I'm not going to say what I was going to say.
Fair enough. Let's keep that there. We're not going to explore that. We just said we are not a political channel, so let's just follow our own rules. Okay. Good catch. He says, I think anyone with half a brain agrees that minimum wage will probably not be amazing for businesses. The real argument considers if a minimum wage increase will yield a net benefit when adjusted for resulting from inflation/unemployment for people who do not make a living wage. Now, I'm going to stop there because he admits that he hasn't taken a deep dive. But his point here is that he even agrees that anyone half a brain would say that mandatory minimum wage isn't the best solution. I found this one a little confusing for me. For me, I was like, okay, well, what's your argument then? Are you arguing for mandatory minimum wage or without it? In that case, if you're not arguing either one, then are you trying to say that Jason and I should present our own solution? Because no one can present a solution to that right now. I feel like that's a tall order. What do you think, Jason?
So here's where you and I are going to disagree for the first time, Charlene. I didn't find this confusing.
Cool. Okay.
So to me, again, this is where my lack of focus, my lack of mental focus, an issue I struggle with. I go back and forth, and when anything is presented to me, I go back and forth in my own head. So to me, this was Jack Black going kind of back and forth, thinking maybe out loud or through the keyboard through the $15 minimum wage thing. That's how I'm perceiving
I missed that. Okay.
because that's how I think through a lot of stuff too. So Jack, let me know if that is the case. But in terms of my thoughts on that, while I haven't personally done a study on the $15 minimum wage myself, like in actually getting like businesses together and surveying them myself, I have, again, studied tens of thousands of companies all over the world. And based on that empirical, anecdotal, statistical, whatever the category is, data, far fewer than 95% of all companies on earth earn consistently higher than 5% profit margins. When I say consistently, I mean over 5-10 year periods, not just 1 year, not just 2 years, 3 years, whatever. This is over time. The reason for that is competition throughout business is typically fierce unless companies have competitive advantages. Frankly, there's nothing you, the government, me, anybody can do about competitive advantages, because there's an entire competitive advantage that comes from being a government regulated entity, which most people are probably wondering, how the hell does that happen? That's the whole reason for government regulation, to stop competitive advantages from happening, from outsized profits from happening. Altria is an example of this. They make cigarettes, they own the Marlboro brand, and that owns, I think it's something, the last time I saw, like 43% of the entire cigarette market share in the US. They are one of the most highly regulated companies on earth. Again, how does that give them an advantage? And they also earn huge, consistently huge profits. Again, how? Because they are so regulated to the point that smaller companies cannot come in and keep up with the taxes, the high taxes on those companies. They cannot keep up with the litigation and legal fees. They cannot keep up with the government regulations. So it keeps companies, smaller companies and innovative companies, from entering the arena. That's why Altria, Philip Morris, British Tobacco, and then the Japanese one, I always forget the Japanese one's name. Reynolds, there's another one, and there's a Japanese one. I can never remember what the Japanese one is. But that's why they've dominated for decades, is because they're so highly regulated. They can't be disrupted. So there's an entire government regulation around that, which, again, was meant to solve the problem, but it's not.
Well, now on this, Jason, I have to thank you, because now that you've explained that, not only in where he was coming from, but also in adding the further context there, I have to admit that I missed that. Jack was processing, and I wish that I hadn't missed that. So I correct my confusion here. I understand where both of you are coming from, and you were right, Jason. You and I did deviate on this, and I'm so glad that we did, because I just got educated, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you for that.
Yeah, of course. And again, Jack, if I'm not perceiving that right, or if I'm not reading that the right way, let me know. But that's how I think through things as well, as which is why I saw it that way.
Perfect. All right. Now this part, I love that he went here. I just love this. I was like, oh my gosh, we need to get Jack on the show with us, Jason, if he's willing to, because he could be another student. And I'm your student. So he should be here. He should be on one of our shows, because how he's going here is he's now switching from making his arguments to actually asking questions. Like, wait a minute. Well, let's look at this. He says, now, I haven't taken a deep dive into this, but my understanding of the pro minimum wage argument is as follows. Supply/demand is non-linear. And in a linear system, nothing changes. Before I carry on, do you agree with that? Is that correct? I think that's an educational question.
So here's where I'm going to go into teacher mode, and full teacher mode. Any of my students watching this or listening to this will know that they've seen me do this before.
Oh, dude, I'm so excited. Please educate me.
And I say this to all students that I've ever had. I am not educated by a college. I had to learn everything myself. over the last 15 plus years due to severe health issues that I was dealing with in the past. And because of those health issues, I was not able to go to college, meaning I don't have a traditional finance degree like most people do. Because of that, I have far varying views when it comes to things like supply and demand. Here's where the teacher mode comes in. You're making that too complex. Supply and demand should, in general, go up about the same rate over time, again, in general, based on the economics of the industry, blah, 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 blah. What happens when supply and demand get out of whack is what we're seeing now, when there's an enormous amount of demand and there's not enough supply. So it's causing inflation. Why did that happen? Because of the COVID closures last year that caused massive supply chain issues that we're still dealing with today. That's a real world. So here, I said earlier, I don't deal in theory. This is a real world example of what's happening right now in supply and demand. Another example is the cannabis market up in Canada. They opened the cannabis market up there, I think 2018, 2019. Demand has gone up slightly for marijuana products, but supply has gone up drastically. So it's the opposite of what we just talked about.
Okay.
When that happens, when supply goes up and demand does not, when supply, like the line, I wish I could show you the chart right now, but the chart kind of goes up a little bit and then it goes almost straight up for the supply, not the demand, for the supply. When that happens, what's happening in Canada now is, or what was happening in Canada last year and a couple years ago, was because of this, their prices were being lowered, which means their revenue was going down, which means their profits were going down. That led to many cannabis companies going bankrupt. And people were freaking out about this because they didn't expect this to happen. This happens in every single kind of major innovation. Supply or demand gets way out of whack, and then it comes back into focus. They kind of go back into things. But again, how does that affect business when supply and demand are out of whack? In that case, in Canada, the legal selling price, I think it was per ounce of marijuana. Again, this was probably a year and a half ago, so the data might be updated now. But a year and a half ago, and this is for an investment newsletter I was writing for, which is where I did all this research for full transparency.
Yeah,
was like $750 Canadian per ounce. The street value was like $330 an ounce or something like that.
Wow.
So
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So what that led to is companies, again, that led to lower revenues, lower profits because they couldn't compete on price. And that led to more bankruptcies for companies. And so when supply and demand, to bring this point home, get out of the whack massively like it is right now, or like it was a couple of years ago in the cannabis industry, companies go bankrupt, or they get bought out, or they become unprofitable, or they fire people, or they lose a lot of money. Again, is that right or wrong? Like we said in the other videos, I'm not here to say that is what happens.
So in this system, and with that explanation, is he correct? Is supply and demand a non-linear system?
It's hard to tell, frankly, because it depends on the industry. It depends on the industry economics. It depends on the stage that the industry is in, if it's being disrupted, if it's not being disrupted, if it's been around for 4 years, if it's been around for 1 year. Frankly, it depends on a case-by-case situation. But in general, supply and demand should go up or down at about the same rate. If they don't, that's when bad things happen.
Oh, Jason, this is a relational system. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. In my opinion, again, as a non-traditionally trained finance guy, yes.
All right. Well, and I qualify that with, you went to the School of Hard Knocks. And in my personal opinion, that is the best school to go to, because I also went to the School of Hard Knocks, and the education we educate ourselves with often is better than the education we get in university. Now, that's a whole different topic, and I don't want to piss anybody else off, but I like that you did it the hard way.
I agree. I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Perfect. All right. Well, let's go on this premise then. So we think you saying it's relational. All right. So he's saying it's a nonlinear system. He says, because of this non-linearity, there exists levels of minimum wage increases that have a redistributive effect, where the bottom gets a larger slice of the inflationary pie. I need you to educate on this as well. For me, is that true? That doesn't feel true to me. The bottom.
That is not true.
Okay.
That is not true. The reason that's not true is because as a proportion of people's income, poor and middle class people pay more for things like food and gas and clothing and transportation than rich people do. So they are more affected by inflation than rich people. Again, is that right or wrong? That's a social political issue that, again, we're not going to get into, but that's what's happened.
It's an effect.
What's happens. Yeah, that's an effect of what happens. That's actually what happens. And that goes back to another reason why inflation is so bad for everybody, but particularly middle class and poor people, is because not only because things like, let's say, meat goes up. I don't remember what it was, but it was up insane earlier this year. I think in the summer it was up like 40%. Wow. Meat prices, something like that. So that means a pound of meat, for example, let's say beef, was 40% more expensive. Who does that affect more? The rich person, poor person, middle class person, middle class people, and poor people. So I disagree with that for that reason. The other thing is inflation is bad because, again, this goes back to a point I made earlier. If you aren't growing your income or growing your investments or whatever by 5.4% a year in the US, the reason I keep using that number is that's because what's inflation is at right now in the US. If you're not growing at that rate, you're automatically losing money because of the negative effects of inflation eating away at the value of the money.
All right. And I think the reason for that, if I've learned well enough from you, the reason that this is opposite of what he's saying, that the bottom gets a larger slice of the inflationary pie is not true, is because middle class and poor people don't have the same buying power as the wealthy do. So therefore, if they're talking about $1 and a loaf of bread, for example, goes from 40 cents of that $1 to 85 cents for the rest of the things they need, they don't get the benefit, they feel the pain. Is that right?
Yes. And I think one thing that Jack is referencing is that people are expecting wages to go up because of the effects of inflation, and they are, but they're about going up at the same rate as inflation. So another way I put this in an article that I just actually finished up, that's going to go out as of this recording, I think next Monday on the blog, the 13th maybe of September, is to when inflation and wages go up at about the same rate, let's say they're exactly equal, 5.4% each. That's not a net gain of wages of 5.4%. That puts you at a 0% increase in your wages because you have to think about inflation. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. It does to me. We'll find out if anybody listening, if it makes sense to them as well.
Yeah, another way I like to put this, and I think I put this better in the article I wrote because I had more time to think about it, is that essentially what that means, again, let's say assume they are going up 5.4% each. That means we're exactly at the same starting point as we were this time last year during the height of a global pandemic in terms of economic realities, not just kind of what's happening, not just on the numbers, but economic realities, because they're both going up at 5.4%.
Oh, and Jason, that's where we went back to, they relate to one another. So I suppose the point here from Jack or anybody else making this point could be, listen, if inflation causes wages to rise, this is a good thing. But what we're not considering is, okay, the wages may rise, but so will the costs.
Yeah. I mean, if 5.4% inflation caused wages to rise 30%, that's a different story. That would be probably, frankly, a good thing. But that's not what's happening right now. So
they both happen in increments over time. And then over time, the big difference is too big because we are happening in increments. So in your situation there, what you just said, if it rose 30%, we haven't seen that. That's not the way this works, right?
Yeah.
All right. Now, we're going to go with his premise, though. Now, he's saying, as a reminder, that levels of minimum wage increase that have a redistributive effect where the bottom line gets a larger slice of the inflationary pie. This is desirable because under the current order, some do not make enough money to survive, and they should be able to survive by working without a need for welfare. And they put in parentheses, not an argument against safety nets, but rather, if you have a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you should have the means to live a decent life. This smells a little bit to me like another social argument, but I do want to give him credit here. Is it just social, there might be a numbers thing here. Can we work this out on the numbers? Could that work? If you have a 9 to 5, 5 days a week, you should have the means to live a decent life. Are we going to get into business responsibility and what we should be paying people in this discussion? What do you think?
Yeah, the problem I have is should, and we talked about this in our other video. Should implies that is what needs to be happening right now, or that's what we should force to happen. That I have a problem with that word in these contexts for that reason, as we
Are
talked
we
about in the other
shooting
video.
all over ourselves right now?
yeah, because and we even made a point in I think it was the first video where I think you made the point actually, Charlene, was just because somebody should aspire to something greater doesn't mean they should, or that they will, or that they even want to. And that's a fair point. Again, that goes back to, and that's where it gets into the political, social arenas. For me, is because again, the shoulds. I have a saying that I use. I don't invest on ifs, and should to me falls into that category. I don't invest in shoulds, and I don't really care frankly about shoulds. I care about what's kind of actually really happening and how to adapt to that.
So where we are here, we ventured in a territory with Mr. Jack that he is making an argument based on ideology, not on reality. And we are not necessarily able to focus on ideology. The way the world should work versus the way the world actually works are two different things in this context. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and I'm not saying to not aspire to those things, but again, that goes back to controlling what I can control, and I can't control what somebody or what businesses should be doing. Okay. I think again, this might have been part 2 of that video that we were talking about. It might have been another video, I don't remember. But I like to pay my people, actually, as a business owner, I like to pay my people more than the quote unquote going rate, because I know the studies behind it. But I do that when I can afford to do so. Business wise, I don't put the business in jeopardy. Or I try not to put the business in jeopardy to do those things either.
So I have to point this out here. Not only do I know that you prefer to pay your people more, but Jason, you and I are members of a business mastermind group, and you have shared that with your own mastermind. And I have been one of your biggest opponents on that. I have said, no, you don't pay more. You pay what the market dictates, and you serve your business. You're a financial guy. You should know better on this. Interestingly enough, you're taking the human needs route on that. It's a little bit of a deviation from what you normally do, right?
Oh yeah, no, this is where the human, emotional, whatever side of me, psychological, again, whatever you want to call it, comes into play. I want to help. My whole goal with everything that we work towards is to help people get out of and stay out of poverty. And then once you do that, if you're already out of that stage, is to grow and multiply your wealth. That's everything that we do. Everything that we focus on is for those reasons. And that essentially is not an emotional or is not a logical reason. I can make it logical and nerdy, because I'll go there, because I'm also a believer in statistics, and the more people we have out of poverty and in the middle class or rich levels throughout the entire world, the better the world will be, and the more likely we will have the ability to not only find but train the next Einsteins, the next Marie Curies, the next Elon Musk, the next Jeff Bezos, the next whoever XYZ person you want to put in there, the next people that are going to help us transform the world into a better place. Because when it comes down to it, yes, I'm a logical finance nerd, but I'm also an eternal optimist as well.
I love it. One thing that you and I also take a different approach on is that for you, you want to start them off at making more than the market rate. I prefer to start them at the market rate and then reward financially those that go above and beyond. I want to promote and pay more for the high performers. I realize that makes me, in fact, in our own mastermind, that makes me unpopular with some of our own mastermind members. But I appreciate the route you take. You say, no, they shouldn't have to work to get more value than what they're worth, because I already value them at that level. So I'm going to pay that. For me, I'm like, no, you start at a lower level and you have to scrape your way to the top. And we just take a different approach on this.
Yeah, and I think both work, as we've seen, to some degree. That is not to say, however, that I don't have high standards and I'm not always trying to constantly raise them, though, either. But yeah, I do try to pay my people more when I can than the kind of quote unquote going rate.
I love it. One thing you did there was help me to realize that I needed to reevaluate my approach to hiring and the wages that I'm offering as a business owner. Nobody else had done it in quite that way. You did it in a way where, especially because you're a financial guy, when you were pointing out, well, I'm going to pay more. And I was like, Jason, that doesn't make any sense for the books. Like, if you were to look at my books, why would I do that? You would probably tell me I'm spending too much money. Your response, and I remember this day, your response was, because I'm investing in people. They're not numbers. And I went, wow. Did not see that coming from a financial guy. Had to give you credit there.
Yes, that'll come out every once in a while. And like I said earlier, the human, yes, I'm a finance guy and investment guy and numbers guy and super logical, but when it comes down to it, the human part of things is the most important thing. It's just a matter, I think, Jack, and this entire conversation is just a matter of how to kind of go about that. I think we're talking about the same thing.
I think so. In some instances, I think so. He says, interested to hear your thoughts on minimum wage argument or alternative better solutions, maybe a video. Now, we're already covering this in the medium. We're making a whole podcast, a whole thing about this, Jack, because you inspired us to do so. I do feel like you have given your thoughts on minimum wage argument or alternative better solutions. Well, actually, now that I read that again, you have given your thoughts on minimum wage. You have not offered any thoughts to alternative better solutions. Do you have anything in mind? We've never even talked about that.
Me personally, no.
Yeah.
I do not.
Fair enough.
I'm not that smart to come up with my own economic system.
You'd be a billionaire if you could
alleviate those problems. No, working on that, but not there yet.
Sorry, my capitalist just came out again. Believe me, Jack, if he had an alternative solution, I'd be the first one to partner up with Jason and market the heck out of it. I'd be like, oh, we're getting you out in front of everyone. Fair enough. He does say, don't a lot of these businesses have leverage in their, we're getting an area that I can contribute to as well, but I want you to go first on all of these because these are good questions. Don't a lot of these businesses have leverage in their sales versus employee cost? Example, 1% increase in wages leads to less than 1% increase in unit cost. Stop there and see what you think on that.
No, that's not true. Again, that's economic theory talked about in this is part of the efficient market theory that's taught in most finance departments worldwide. I don't agree with that. Should that happen? Again, that's where we get into shoulds. Should that happen? Should businesses optimize for that? Should they work towards that? Yes. Does that happen in a real world sense often? No. Why? Because again, people are involved. Training has to happen. Misunderstandings happen. Customer needs change. There are a huge amount of things that go into not only hiring somebody, but training them to do what you want them to do at a high level, and then getting them to do that consistently. And then imagine you have a company with 100,000 people in it. It's already hard to do with one person. How hard is that to do with 100,000 people in a business? That again, should that happen? Is that kind of the economic theory? Yes. Does that happen in a real world sense? Frankly, very rarely. And that's when you get into things like A players, superstars. That's when you find those people. Yeah. And you train them well and you give them time to make mistakes and all that stuff. You have to give them the right culture and ability to do that kind of stuff too, because even if they're great, their mistakes are going to happen. Again, disagreements are going to happen. Customer needs are going to change. All those things are going to change constantly.
I love it. All right. My contribution to this is, first of all, Jason was a lot more intellectual than I will be about it because he's the financial guy. Now, as an experienced business owner, I can color in this part of this. He said, as an example, 1% increase in wages leads to less than 1% increase in unit costs. No, that is not the way that works, because when my sales increase, I can't go to my suppliers and my vendors and say, hey, great news. My sales have increased, so I've given my employees a raise. I've done this to help them out. So would you please do me a favor and reduce the cost so that I can actually absorb that and justify that raise? That is not the way that works. Suppliers and vendors do not care. Why? Because they're operating in the same system that I'm operating in, and costs relate to wages, relate to inflation, and everything goes up at the same time.
Well, and this actually, your point gets into more of my wheelhouse than I was even in. This is something I teach. Again, this is something all students that I teach, that we go through, that are with me long enough, that I teach. If sales go up, but costs go up at about the same rate, that's usually what happens for probably 80, 90% of business. When sales go up, costs go up about at the same rate. The rare companies, the ones that I look for to invest in the portfolios I manage, they are able to control cost as sales rise, and that increases their profit margins. That is insanely rare. Insanely rare. Probably, again, I've been using 5%. Companies that can do this well over long periods of time, probably even less, probably like 2% of companies, by just my anecdotal top of the head thinking, that can actually pull that off. Again, over the long term, not just kind of a 1 year thing, a 1 year blip. Over the long term, that's extremely rare that companies can actually do that.
Love it.
If, however, and this is what I tell students, if you do find a company that does that, you need to research them further.
Yeah, let's look at them as an investment.
Yeah.
Well, we can, because it is so rare. It is so rare, and I've never been in a personal business situation where I've said to my suppliers or vendors that I've increased sales, so therefore you should do this. What usually would happen there is, great, then you can afford to pay me $1.50 for widget instead of $1. I mean, they'd be like, they would just increase their prices. you know?
Exactly.
All right. He says, and relative percent of family spending taken up by fast food seems as though it wouldn't change very much. It's kind of inflexible. And then he does say, I'm not sure if I'm using this term correctly, like the price of salt. $2 or $1, I don't really care. I'll buy it either way. I'm not sure I'd buy the margins argument in the context of federal minimum wage. It seems as though in the worst case scenario, there is just equivalent inflation and everything cancels out. You're going to have to take that one because it's your expertise.
So that is incorrect. That's why I hate when the US government puts out the 5.4% number or any inflation number, because people think automatically that's what the price of everything goes up. That's just the average. And usually they strip stuff out of that. So I've actually looked at the data from, who is it? CBO, Congressional Budget Office, whoever put that data. I've actually looked at the data. The average for everything was 5.4% in the last, I think this was in July, when the inflation numbers last came out, maybe August sometime, 5.4%. Meat, I don't know if it was this time, but maybe it was last year, was up like 40%. Cars and vehicles, both used and new, they have categories for all this stuff. Both used and new were up huge percentage points, like multiple, I think it was like 11 percentage points. So it varies. Everything, when let's say salt, to use his example, goes up, let's say it goes up by $1.
Yeah.
Something else like meat, for example, that you would use the salt on might be going up even more than that. Another reason inflation is so bad is because typically when that happens, gas prices go up, which is happening now. When that happens, transportation costs go up for companies, and that adds enormous extra cost to move stuff from where it's made or manufactured or bought or whatever to get it into the stores, for you and I to buy. When that happens, companies typically raise their prices, and that leads to more inflation and higher prices for us. And this, again, in that article that it's releasing, I think it's on Monday, on the 13th, is Kimberly-Clark. They make things like Scott's paper towels, Kleenex, stuff like that. They make stuff everyday people use every single day, no matter the economic. Yeah, household staples, consumer staples is what they're called. And they raise prices because their costs went up, so they had to raise prices. And a lot of companies are doing that right now because their costs are going up. Again, maybe it's not just their individual goods, but maybe it's transportation as well. That's prices for that's going up.
Makes sense. Well, I love this then. I'll follow up with this. He says, if everyone's margins go to shit at once, doesn't everyone else just adjust? I mean, yeah, but it sounds like based on what you're saying, yes, everybody else does adjust, but not in a socially positive way that he's intending. What do you say to that?
Oh, no. So again, who does the price rise on meat? Who does the price rise on Kleenex and paper towels?
Suppliers.
On Jif peanut butter. Who does that affect? That affects suppliers. That affects the business. That affects the consumer.
Mm-hmm.
That affects the entire. That's not a supply chain, but it's the entire ecosystem. That's probably the best way to put it. That affects the entirety of everything when prices go up, and it disproportionately affects poor middle class people because, yes, a dollar rise on salt is not probably super important, but meat prices going up by 40% per pound for a family of 5 like I have, that's important.
Not only important, but actually detrimentally affecting the buying power. Again, aren't we back to buying power? Isn't that your point?
Yes.
Okay. Oh my gosh, I'm so proud of myself. I'm actually tracking this, Jason. I'm tracking.
try to make things as easy to understand as possible.
All right. Well, hey, listen, we both know that if you can make it easy for me to understand, then everybody else has a chance. Okay. All right. He says, I can see your point for local minimum wages, where you can lose customers to businesses over the border with lower minimum wage. But doesn't the federal wage increase prevent this effect? I have something to add here before you answer. We're talking about 2 different policies here, Jack. The federal minimum wage actually does not affect anybody else. That only affects federal employees. We also have the state minimum wage, and federal does not trump state in this case. So that's just the way that works. But Jason, what are your thoughts on this?
That is correct. He is correct. That is how it not only should work, but that's likely often how it does work. However, we're not in a closed down society anymore. We're in a thunder. Hopefully that wasn't too loud.
Couldn't hear it.
Perfect. That we are no longer in a even state or a single country-wide economy, not even in the United States. We're in a global economy pretty much everywhere in the entire world. You're not just competing against your local areas anymore. You're competing against regions, you're competing against states, you're competing against countries, and people from these different areas. That is one of the effects of globalization that's frankly not probably ever going to go away. And it's not even necessarily due to policy. It's, in my opinion, due to the internet. Because the internet, as long as you have the internet, even in China, where they lock a lot of stuff down, if you are smart enough and savvy enough, you can get around those things. So that, I think, has forever opened the competition when it comes to worldwide competition for wages and work and jobs and stuff like that. So, for example, I think the state of Florida where I live, the minimum wage in this state is going to be $15 by 2025 or something like that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't affect, for example, somebody in Georgia,
Right.
or even federal employees inside of the state of Florida who work at like post office. I think those would be considered federal employees. It's downpouring all of a sudden. Can you hear that, by the way?
No, I can't, but I love that you could experience it. I love thunderstorms.
Yeah, so do I. So yeah, that is in my understanding, that is correct.
All right. Well, in this context, he follows up with, or do you think the shock would lead to short-term business failures? Now, he's relating this in this discussion for federal wages, but I think on this one, we can revisit a little. We talked about it at the beginning. Let's separate this. Or do you think the shock, I think what he means is the shock of minimum wage mandatories could lead to short-term business failures? He did say, I can sort of see that happening. So what do you think there?
It's not a should. This will happen. Again, I can't say to what degree, if it will be a net benefit, as he said earlier in one of his comments. I don't know. I haven't dug that deep into the data on that to see if it will be a net benefit. And frankly, that would just be purely mostly, even though they're getting data, that would be guessing in my estimation, until it actually happens. What I can say is, especially in the restaurant, and we talked about this, I think it was in the second part of the video, the $15 minimum wage video. This will massively negatively affect companies like restaurants and fast food places, because their margins are razor thin, like 1 or 2 percentage points.
Margins matter.
So this will massively affect those kinds of companies, which let's get it real loud. It's so that it will affect especially those kinds of businesses disproportionately.
Well, will and does. We've already seen examples of this happening.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, and I don't know if we got into this on the video, I don't remember, but again, when I was working for an investment newsletter last year, I was doing some research and found a stat that 110,000 restaurants alone in the United States closed last year due to COVID restrictions because they couldn't keep paying their bills.
Right.
So again, will it have that large of an effect in the US? I have no idea, but it will have an effect. It will close more businesses.
Yeah.
And again, we're talking about small business here. When people think about business, they think about Apples, they think about Amazons, they think about Walmarts. They don't think about the small businesses that this will affect. Can Amazon, can Walmart, can Apple, can these companies have a they can probably have a $30 minimum wage, $50 minimum wage probably, but most other businesses cannot.
Well, yeah, and in that situation, Jason, I mean, even the big ones, the conglomerates like Amazon, Apple, etc. Yeah, they could have they could have any number, pick a high number, probably, but it would still put a ticker on them. They're still business. What it would mean is that they would have a longer time frame in which to work with before they started feeling that pain. But eventually, they would feel that pain. In the meantime, it would kill a lot of small businesses, and small businesses actually are the businesses that compromise most of American capitalism. We can only list what off the top of our head, like maybe 5 conglomerates. Small businesses are the ones that are running the show. Those are the ones that are affected by this. And so when we say, to Jack's point, that we are focused on business, yes, we are. The reason we're focused on business is, first of all, we're supposed to be focusing on small business. And the reason we do that is because we care about the people. But the world works the way it works, and everybody's blaming business owners for this stuff and putting it on their shoulders. I feel like you've done a great job of illustrating the buck literally does not only not stop with them, but they have very little control of it to begin with. Is that right?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. 100%.
Right. Now he's saying, with this in mind, he's saying minimum wage, mandatory minimum wage. It seems low risk, high reward for me, considering the dearth and empirical or theoretical minimum wage research. Is probably not the best option, but it's the only one happening anytime soon. What do you say to that?
Again, I don't like theory stuff. I actually like what works in the real world. And the information out there on both sides of this argument, frankly, is biased by those people's personal biases. If anybody says they don't have a bias of any kind, they are lying to you. Everybody has biases.
Lying or not able to self-reflect.
Yeah, exactly. If somebody says, "Oh, I'm not biased about anything," they're lying to you. Everybody has biases. Some people's biases are skin color. Some people's biases are political affiliations. Some people's biases are even as simple and seemingly meaningless as being attracted to a certain look of a person, certain kind of person. Those are all biases. So there is that. I don't put much weight into those theories and papers for those reasons, because again, I'm a very practical person. What works in the real world, and in my opinion, based on again 15 years in this industry, that is not a low risk, high reward proposition. That is a high risk, low reward proposition, in my opinion. Based on my 15 years in the industry, for the reasons we've talked about in this, almost 2-hour long talk now.
Yeah, and to your point, if we were to argue everything, then it would be like 16 hours long. We can't. But I love this.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, now Jason, our friend Jack finishes up the email in such a classy way. I just love how he did this. He already went out of the way to tell you how much you're wrong, how much he disagrees with you, and what you got to look at, right? And he had very intellectual arguments to make all of his points. But then he finishes up. This is so awesome. He says, interested to see what you think. Love the stock videos, by the way. Keep it up. Oh my gosh. What do you think of that? Oh.
I love that. It brought a smile to my face yesterday when I first read it, and it brought a smile to my face right now as I'm talking. And I'm sorry, I feel like I'm yelling, but it's really loud here. It's downpouring.
No, I can hear you just fine. You're good.
But yeah, no, that was awesome. That's frankly a main reason we're doing this conversation, because we could both tell that, Jack, that you cared about these issues, and we wanted to kind of give our counterpoints in a different format, because frankly, it took us an hour and a half, 2 hours to do this via voice. It would take us, because I'm also a professionally trained writer, so I would go back and write it, and then I would edit it like 4 times. So it'd probably take me 5 hours at least to do this. So we figured this would be a better way to present this to you, frankly.
Correct. And Jack, to add to that, Jason is correct there. And I happen to be one of the people that can be like, Jason, no squirrel syndrome. He is right. Jack, I'm telling you, if you left this to Jason's Vices, you wouldn't get the response to this for like 3 months. He would be writing, rewriting, doing all research. He would be like, it's not perfect yet. This was so good. And 3 months from now, I was like, well, 3 months from now, he'd be like, Jason, who? So we wanted to acknowledge the contribution you have made to this point as soon as possible.
Yeah. And Jack, thanks again. I appreciated your first response where you were saying some not very nice things, but I knew what you were coming from and the points you wanted to make. That's why the response I sent to you to that one was so lengthy, because I really appreciate all the comments, as Charlene said, and that's why we're doing this whole thing for you today and other listeners out there, mainly as a thank you to you for bringing this discussion, because frankly, I think more discussions like this should happen. Civil discussions. Would love to talk to you on one of our lives we do, or a show or something, as Charlene talked about. And as long as we can keep things respectful and go from that angle, I'm good to do that. And would love your input further on all this stuff. And thanks for watching, and thanks for your great comments, and thanks for saying that you love the videos, by the way.
And that's a wrap. What are your thoughts? Please drop your comments in the comment section of wherever you listen to your podcast. I monitor each and every one personally. And if you know an entrepreneur who is changing the world one person at a time, I don't care how big or small the business is, I would love to meet them. You can reach out to me, Charlene, Charlene, at hello@biztalkmastermind.com. And if you are an entrepreneur who is craving community and peer-to-peer support for the lonely path that you are on, check us out at www.biztalkmastermind.com. That is BIZ talkmastermind.com. Catch you soon.